Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1964's The Horror of Purdy Beach, directed by Del Tenney.
While the beach set twists to the big beat sound of the Delaires, swinging out with 6 rocking hits. While the cycle gangs burn up the road and strong-arm their way into the party with fists flying, while teenagers prepare for a secluded slumber party, terror strikes from the bottom of the sea, an invasion of ghoulish atomic beasts who live off human blood.
Can they be killed? I don't know, Lieutenant.
They are the living dead. They're zombies.
Again and again, the fiendish monsters struck like nothing that ever stalked this earth. An entire city in the throes of panic, at the mercy of demons from the dead.
American International Pictures started life out as American Releasing Corporation. Founded by James H. Nicholson, a former sales manager for Real Art Pictures, and Sam Arkoff, an entertainment lawyer, they were pretty much the go-to company for drive-in and exploitation films from the 1950s, pretty much through the 1970s. Their first release was 1955's The Fast and the Furious, which I considered putting on the show until I saw it. It was awful. Understandably, their first releases didn't see any profit. They asked theater owners why they thought this was, and the theater owners responded that while adults were staying home to watch TV, teenagers were coming to the theater. Arkoff and Nicholson then polled teenagers about what kind of movies they'd like to see, and they responded that they'd like to see juvie movies and or horror movies. AIP then took what I think was a brilliant next step. They came up with titles, exploitable titles, and then marketed them to theater owners. If the theater owners, and who better to ask, who knew their audiences better, reacted strongly to a title, then AIP would hire a writer to create a script around the title they came up with. That way they had guaranteed bookings before the movie was even made. Roger Corman, who had directed The Fast and the Furious, became their go-to director. He worked fast, and more importantly, he worked cheap. Corman cranked out dozens of movies on the cheap and kept the drive-ins and theaters packed. As the 50s gave way to the 60s, AIP felt that there were some teenage markets they weren't exploiting, and in 1963 released Beach Party. This was another runaway hit and led to a series of beach party films that unfortunately didn't stop until 1966's Ghost in the Invisible Bikini. All of that stuff has absolutely nothing to do with this movie, but I thought it was interesting. As is always the way with filmmakers, whatever is successful gets imitated, which brings us to tonight's movie. Although distributed by 20th Century Fox, Horror of Purdy Beach was an independent production by a Stamford, Connecticut director by the name of Del Tenney. While Stamford technically isn't on the ocean, it's more like a bay town, there was a beach, so doing a beach movie was a given. Tenney was a bit doubtful about mixing the beach genre with the horror genre, but he did it anyway and created this mess you're about to see. The plot is as follows. The rockin' teens, and I'd say maybe a tenth of them are actual teenagers, if that many, of Stamford love to hang out at the beach, make awful jokes, and dance to the cool beats of the Delaires. Meanwhile, a ship carrying toxic waste is dumping 55-gallon drums of this stuff into water that looks like it's about 200 feet offshore. The cans aren't sealed properly, and the ooze covers the skeletons of sailors who died in shipwrecks. As toxic waste is wont to do, it covers said skeletons, and they grow into these leafy, huge-headed monsters with what looks like bundles of brats sticking out of their mouths. Of course, being the spawn of toxic waste, the first thing they do is start slashing up bathing beauties, invading slumber parties, and generally causing havoc. With the bodies of the young lovelies turning up all over the place, slashed and covered with Bosco, which is apparently what the monsters live on, the police, who for some reason have their lights and sirens on everywhere they go, drop a tissue sample off to Dr. Gavin, a pipe-smoking scientist who apparently is an expert on all things toxic. That night, the distaff part of the gang has a PJ party, complete with buckets of water on top of the half-open front door, a hootenanny, and a pillow fight. The monsters stage a granny panty raid and kill most of the girls, but make off with a few of them as well. The newspapers go crazy with the story, and we see several editions of the paper with the headline screaming, "Monsters strike again," and "Monsters still at large," along with interesting stories below the headline, such as "Panic in New York, Menagerie breaks loose," and "Planarians give new clues to early migration." These must be pretty important stories since they appear on the front page of every single edition of a newspaper you see in this movie. Dr. Gavin employs a housemaid named Eulabelle, who is, as apparently all black women in the early 60s were, a firm believer in the supernatural. "It's the voodoo, all right," she says. Dr. Gavin laughs this off. After a trio of girls get attacked by the monsters after going to Del Tenney's gas station, the director makes a cameo here as the attendant, our overaged hero Hank Green and his equally rapidly approaching 40 girlfriend Elaine Gavin, the doctor's daughter, hang out at the local teen hangouts and rock out once again to the sounds of the Del Airs. When one of the monsters loses an arm attacking a mannequin through a plate glass window, the still alive arm is brought back to Dr. Gavin, and since I have a strict policy against spoiling movies, even terrible ones like this, I'll stop here. Take my word for it, however, this movie is not worth staying up for, which means all of you will stay up and watch it to see if I'm telling the truth. Why? Have I ever lied to you? This is a place where I usually do bios, but the actors and actresses who appear in this movie have only one credit: this movie. Eulabelle Moore was a nightclub singer, and a few others appeared on one or two TV shows, but there's really no information to impart on any of them. The children in the scene where a family is watching the news are Del Tenney's kids. That's about it. I suppose I could spend a couple of minutes talking about all the idiotic things in this movie, but that kind of thing is frowned upon these days by a lot of people I work and associate with. They say that just the act of getting a movie finished is worthy of praise. I agree with that sentiment. I mean, I've worked on a fair amount of movies myself, and both as an actor and as a member of the crew, and it's a very difficult, labor-intensive task. Making one that's halfway decent is even harder. I'm involved in one right now that's been shooting for a very long time, and while it's been hard work, it's been very rewarding, especially since I know it's going to be really good when it's done. Getting back to the subject, as I said, talking about all the moronic things in a movie is frowned upon these days. It should be celebrated that the makers had the perseverance and determination to carry it all the way through to completion, and that they succeeded in getting distribution and getting the film into theaters. And this film sucks. The jokes are unfunny, the dance choreography is spastic, the music blows, the action scenes are lame, and all in all, the movie just sucks. Why does it suck, you ask? Well, let me tell you. Let's start with the fact that the teenagers in this movie are all well over 20 and the leads are well over 30. None of them can act, and the female lead, Alice Lyon, has all of her lines looped, and I don't believe it's her voice doing the looping. Additionally, the rumble between the big bad bikers and the We Only Want to Dance beach kids is one of the dumbest fights I've ever seen. The moves are supposed to be all athletic and impressive, but they're nothing more than ridiculous. Let me give you the setup. The tramp with the dark hair is the hero's nominal girlfriend, but she likes flirting with the other guys in front of him. She does this to the rather swarthy-looking biker leader at the beach, and of course, that leads to trouble. The hero, who's chatting up the girl that turns out to be the heroine, notices the commotion and decides it's time to act. Now watch this. Yeah, this is a move you're going to use in real life. Apparently, these guys took the Three Stooges self-defense course. That should be good for a broken neck. And now it looks like the hero learned how to fight from Bambi and Thumper. I mean, honestly, who the hell would just know to do something like this? Yeah, cup your hands and flip me. It's clobbering time. But at least after the strangulation, cooler heads prevail and the guys decide to call a truce and shake hands. Then, of course, we get back to the music and dancing as the kids let joy be unconfined to the groovy sounds of the Del Airs. These guys were actually a real surf/garage band that Del Tenney ran across and agreed to appear in the movie. They seem to be Fender fans. The two guitarists play Fender Jazzmasters and the bassist is playing a Fender Precision bass. Tenney found them in New Jersey, and after bringing them in, he had some songs written for them, and as Tenney himself recalled, they picked them up and ran with them. Unfortunately, they stopped before they hit the county line. I can only imagine what they sounded like before the band got a hold of them, although I do have to admit that the rhythm guitarist is definitely rocking the Buddy Holly look. This movie was released about a year before the British invasion, which is something I remember very well. As far as the choreography goes, there are plenty of shots of nubile girls doing this really odd line dance called the zombie stomp that includes a lot of falling over and such. I imagine the bikinis in this movie were pretty brief for the early 60s, but the outfits the girls are wearing during the pajama party look like they were borrowed from their grandmothers. Why they'd be wearing outfits so brief in public and wind up wearing muumuus when they sleep is beyond me, but there you go. Speaking of the slumber party, the girls seem to be expecting an invasion by the fun-loving boys they hang out at the beach with, so those little minxes set a bucket of water on top of the half-open door so whatever sucker comes in first gets a bath. Then they have a pillow fight, which of course all girls do when they're having a sleepover because it's in the female bylaws. I could go on for many minutes talking about the slope-headed cliches that pop up in this movie, but I imagine that right now all of you guys are practically salivating at the thought of seeing this dog. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the horror of Party Beach, right here on Cleveland Classics Cinema.